Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 13th, 2021. The infamous Wednesday the 13th. Not as well known as Friday the 13th, but I don't know. I wouldn't walk under any ladders if I were you, because you're too tall. Maybe that's the reason. You'll hit your head. And I don't know. Always probably a bad idea to walk under a ladder. I always wondered about that superstition until I realized later on in life that it wasn't so much about creating bad luck for yourself in some, sort of superstitious sort of way as things could fall on you from underneath the ladder. Walking underneath where someone's working, well, dangerous idea. Black cat thing I haven't figured out yet, except that, crossing the path of any cat could get you scratched, I suppose. I don't know. Anyway, we'll examine all of these spooky traditions perhaps during the month of October as we're reminded by a spate of usually pretty bad horror movies being played at marathon style on every channel in the country because somehow Halloween has taken over last day of the month and it somehow takes over the entire thing. Evangelicals not doing well in their campaign against Halloween. They're still at that. I think they're a couple of years ago seemed to have reached a peak, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago as they began convincing kids in the neighborhood that Halloween was witchcraft and therefore evil, and they should do the Christian thing, which I guess was, I don't know what, go to the church and get candy, which is totally different. They had to lure them in with candy, nonetheless. The kids did not want to miss out on that. They just didn't want them participating in the pagan ritual part of it or something, and then they started to say, well, it's okay to come in costume, but I guess wholesome Christian, I don't know. I think that fell apart. Anyway, they're all busy now protesting mask mandates and vaccine mandates and critical race theory instead here in our county. So, at least they've got something to do. Also called to my attention, by the way, is it's not just here, it's all over the country. People having giving their local school boards and local elected officials more than a hard time over these mandates. Become a widely reported story. As a matter of fact, saw some stuff last night that I saw via Twitter, but in addition to having picked up on it, just through the grapevine on Twitter, Adam McGinnis has pointed this stuff out as a proper topic probably for the show. Probably true, although a lot of the evidence of it comes in video format. But in particular, Ron Filipkowski, who's been getting his name called quite a bit for documenting all of these horrific stories all over the country, not just about harassing of local elected officials, but all sorts of documentation of the, disintegration of society thanks to Donald Trump, basically. But happened to focus on the story of Florida school board member Jennifer Jenkins. She's from where? Brevard County, I think. Yeah. Okay, and I don't know. I guess has she been talking directly to him? Is this just something that Filipkowski picked up on? Anyway, she's had it pretty rough, and I guess she spoke out finally in a session of the school board recently, explaining to everyone exactly what's going on. I guess there are some Republican members of the school board making light of the notion that she's been targeted and harassed somehow. But sometimes you have to spell out exactly what's going on in order to wake people up to just how bad it is. Because I think they had in mind, well, you're being protested here at the school board or booed, or people are carrying signs, or maybe even picketing outside your house. And she was explaining, I'm not even opposed to that, which, I think most people actually are opposed to people picketing outside the houses of elected officials. But people do it. And sometimes under extreme duress. I don't know. I suppose it could be, I could find myself in such a situation where I think it's called for at some point. But for the most part, I don't bother people at their house. I don't even leave my house. So what's the difference? But she was saying it's not even that she minds. She's okay even confronting people who are out in front of their house when she's on her way out or taking her kids to school. But apparently they've also been sneaking around the back and walking around in her backyard and brandishing weapons at their neighbors when the neighbors peek over the fence and ask what the hell is going on around here. And the part that really got me, that I thought was above and beyond, was she was mentioning she took her daughter on a play date, and I guess apparently had to, Department, I don't know what DCF stands for, but a Department of Children and Family, I don't know, Services or something like that. But you get the idea. They have one in your county too, probably with a different name. Shows up at her daughter's play date, insisting that they need to examine her daughter under her clothes because there have been reports that she's been abusing the child, and check her for burn marks or bruises or what have you. And, well, that's not just embarrassing. It's pretty damaging and real intrusion into somebody's life, and really quite amazing what lengths people will go. And, you know, when you're up against the QAnon weirdos and loons, nothing they love better than to accuse others that they disagree with politically of child abuse, and they can actually set the wheels in motion to really disrupt someone's life that way. I'm sure that they're justifying it by saying, well, you're disrupting my life by asking me to wear a mask, which 90% of people are actually doing here in the school anyway. But I don't know. I'm sure they come up with some sort of justification. But anyway, good call. Definitely wanted to bring that out because a lot of people are sharing those videos because she had to speak out and be explicit about it. I guess, I don't know what the background of it is. I would like to see the rest of the video taken at the school board meeting. I imagine that you probably had some Republican members saying, no, you don't actually need any extra security, or no, you don't actually need to, we don't need to close down this meeting because of the danger that these protesters pose. And she had to lay it out and spell it out. And I guess that's changed some minds and at least made us aware of her case. And that's a common thread in a lot of the things that are going on around town these days. In addition, I guess some more news on that weird John Gruden case that sort of intruded into our politics yesterday. We have reason to bring it back up. Note for self for later, I think, because Greg Dworkin's here. And you know how it goes on Wednesdays. We might as well start with the segment rather than drag it out and have to leave in order to greet the sanitation engineers. Good morning, Greg.
Oh, good morning. I just gave Abby a nice little non-rawhide chicken and peanut butter flavored bone, so hopefully she'll munch quietly next to us and not intrude, but you never know with Abby.
Peanut butter flavored bone from the chicken or the peanut flavored chickens that you're raising.
Well, yeah, she likes peanut butter and she likes chicken, so why not try this?
Cool. I don't know.
So it's a first.
The
I just got one of these things, and I'm not completely sure, but apparently non-rawhide chews are the thing.
Oh, okay. Did rawhide go out the window?
Abby doesn't care. She eats anything, but she's happy at the moment.
Okay.
The background, partly the background for your segment on the school boards.
Yeah.
Is that every state has a child protection agency of some kind, and
Sure.
each state has a different name for it. Could be BCW, Bureau of Child Welfare, could be DCF, which is Division of Children and Families, or any number of names. But typically what happens is there's two branches of reporting potential child abuse. If you're a professional, you're mandated, like teachers and doctors.
Right.
And then there's an anonymous line you can call for civilians.
Yes.
And generally there are laws that say if you call this, there's no penalty because they want to encourage people to report what they know.
Yeah.
And like anything in this modern world, it can be weaponized. So if you want to be nasty to somebody, then you call and you make a report, and they're sort of obligated to follow up. So that's part of the harassment that's not a how to build a bomb manual, but that's part of the harassment that the school board people have to undergo. Yeah. And interestingly, locally, you're aware of it because you've been aware of the school board stories for a while. And of course, as I pointed out on Twitter, I'm old enough to not totally understand why cathode ray tubes and being awake are political issues.
You're supposed to be awake in school. They yell at you.
Yeah, exactly.
My day
so
when
I'm not getting it. And besides, don't you want to teach people about electronics?
Yeah, right.
So what's
the
wrong with
history of electronics now?
Here's a recent article. This is from the New York Times. The unlikely issue shaping the Virginia governor's race: schools Virginia Republicans in a tight governor's race have been staging Parents Matter rallies and tapping into conservative anger over mandates and critical race theory. And, it's interesting when you look at the polling on this, because there's new CBS polling out yesterday on that race.
We have to do everything by polls now.
Well, it's grounded in terms of, what do people really think? Just because you read a story about these angry Republicans, how numerous are they? And they represent the majority. That's where polling really helps to come in on this.
Okay.
And, for the most part, people like mandates.
These mandates,
it's
anyway,
not clear. It's very hard to pull on critical race theory because most people don't know what it is.
Right.
So what they do know is when you ask who would do better on COVID vaccines, voters say McAuliffe 46, Youngkin 41, Youngkin the Republican and McAuliffe the Democrat, and create more jobs, McAuliffe 41, Youngkin 45. So it's the typical Republican-Democratic breakdown. Social services, Democrats do better, and the economy, and often policing and law and order. Then Republicans do better. National security. These are traditional. It's fixed in people's minds. It's got nothing to do with the individual candidates, and it's got nothing to do with the individual issues. It's just the way it is. So they ask, CBS News poll does, ask the questions, what if different turnout scenarios? Likely voters today, McAuliffe gets 50 and Youngkin gets 47, but if higher turnout, 53 McAuliffe, Youngkin 45, and which reflects the Democratic lean for Virginia. And just like California, this may or may not turn out to be what actually happens. In California, what happened is there were some acceleration issues in the last couple of weeks that clearly drove the election towards the Democrats. It was no surprise by the time the election happened that the Democrat won handily. In Virginia, there's no such late surge that anybody can find. If you actually look at higher turnout elections, the Democrat wins easy. And if you look at likely voter turnout, then it's still a Democratic win, but it's a very tight race. And the thing about pollsters that, it's always good to remind people, they don't just make their living on trying to figure out who people are going to vote for.
All right.
The secret sauce, the big thing that determines what's going on with these polls is trying to predict the electorate. And they often get that wrong. I mean, they like 50% of the time they get that wrong.
Is that right? 50?
And so that's why you look at these polls and say, well, I remember when it was supposed to be a easy race for McAuliffe and it turned out to be a tight race when he ran last time.
Right, okay, maybe.
On the other side of the coin, I remember when it was supposed to be a Ed Gillespie surge.
Oh, yes.
And he lost handily.
Yeah.
So Virginia's tough to poll in that sense. Easy to poll in terms of what people think and tough to poll in terms of who's actually going to vote.
All right.
Right. So both the likely voter and the higher turnout models suggest a Democratic win. The only difference is the margin. And the margin's close enough in the likely voter win so that you could still have a surprise. But it would be a surprise if Youngkin won.
I would be surprised and dismayed.
And this gets to the bigger issue that I want to talk about in this first segment, and that is the David Shore theory of what's going on with the electorate.
Okay, yes.
We've mentioned it on the show, but I rounded up a couple articles that sort of spell it out for you.
Good, thank you. I kind of got it by Monday, but...
Right. So this is Ezra Klein, who is...
I think he's responsible for this whole thing.
Shore is responsible for it.
Right.
Getting fired for saying stuff that people didn't want to hear.
Famous writers are the ones who are responsible for stuff. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But what Klein sums up here is all this comes down to is a simple prescription. Democrats should do a lot of polling to figure out which of their views are popular and which are not popular. Then they should talk about popular stuff and shut up about the unpopular stuff. Traditional diversity and inclusion is super important, but polling is one of the only tools we have to step outside of ourselves and see what the median voter actually thinks. And this theory is often shorthanded as popularism, and it doesn't sound like it would be particularly controversial. But at heart, Shore's theory is a critique of the professional staffers, consultants, and organizers who shape the Democratic Party's message, image, and strategic choices.
Yes.
I think the core problem with the Democratic Party is that the people who run and staff the party are much more educated and ideologically liberal, and they live in cities, and ultimately our candidate pool reflects that.
Yes. So does our voting pool, but okay.
Right? And he's not talking about moderation. One of the highest polling policies, ensures research, is letting Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices. But it's so-called moderates like Sinema who are trying to strike that from the reconciliation bill.
This is the best point.
Drives people crazy. To Shore, this is lunacy. Shore believes the party's become too unrepresentative in its elite levels to continue being representative at the mass level. The only way out of it, he said, is to care more and cater to the preference of our low socioeconomic status supporters. So let me put this a different way.
Blah. Yeah.
Okay. And this is Tom Edsall writing it up.
Okay.
Biden, according to Pew, made significant gains both among all suburban voters and among white suburban voters. In 2020, Biden improved upon Clinton's vote share with suburban voters from 45 to Clinton to 54 for Biden. And the shift was also seen among white voters. Trump won white suburban voters by 4, and he carried but in 2020, but he won that group by 16 in 2016.
Okay, yes.
Right, so he went from 16 to 4. Decline. And critically, all of these shifts reflect the continuing realignment of the electorate by level of educational attainment, or so-called learning skills, with one big difference. Before 2020, education polarization was found almost exclusively among whites, hence the focusing on the white working electorate.
Okay.
Right. Last year, it began to emerge among Hispanics and African Americans. And I have a theory about that has to do with the pandemic, because Hispanics and African Americans in lower paying jobs did not want to see their jobs shuttered.
Right.
So places like Texas and Florida, they voted for the Republican, which isn't an emerging, always going to happen tool, especially with the pandemic waning.
So maybe
we'll talk
not
about that
a
a little bit later.
Issue so much as an immediate circumstances issue.
Right, exactly. So what's that got to do with the Virginia electorate? Well, Northern Virginia has a lot of college-educated white voters.
This is true. I can see them outside my windows if I look.
And inside your windows. So, part of the deal there is that if you're talking about mask mandates and hot-button issues that Republicans like to push, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in Virginia. But, of course, only if those voters turn out. Hence the difference between what they call the likely electorate and the high turnout electorate.
Okay.
And you can never tell in advance really who's going to turn out. Virginia is not a huge early vote state by mail like California.
Right.
And so, you can't really track it.
We're just expanding the early stuff.
You're just getting into that, and it's not really a big percentage of what's going to go on here. For people like McAuliffe to say, look, what you have to do is you have to get rid of the filibuster and pass the stuff that we think is important for Democrats. Does that matter with the electorate? Again, it's the argument about does anything that people say matter to the electorate. In fact, the title of Tom Edsall's piece talking about the David Shore theory is called Democrats Can't Just Give People What They Want.
Oh.
With the idea that because the electorate is stratified, you really can't just run on what appears to be a popular polling issue. White, non-college voters have been drifting toward the Republican Party, and you can't reverse that by giving them a popular bill. That isn't enough. You have to do other things or not do other things. That's the whole David Shore theory. And interestingly, I think one of the better critiques and discussion of this is by Jamel Bouie, who is writing in the New York Times on this, Bill Clinton, Race and Politics of the 1990s, and talks about, how Barack Obama put the coalition that won together fairly well. And by the way, so did Joe Biden. He did win.
Yes.
And an emphasis
Scalise, he did.
In all of the articles that people tend to overlook when this discussion happens is, why is everything focusing on what Biden did or didn't do or Trump did or didn't do? The real issue is 2022 elections and the Senate. Because if you're talking about trying to win over or at least not lose as many white working class voters, it's the Senate that sort of thing shows up in, because the rest of the country is not Northern Virginia. And non-college educated white voters are everywhere, including in the Midwest and in the swing states. And so how they vote, because they're still the largest voting bloc, matters tremendously because of the way the Senate is divided up with Electoral College stuff. So you can't just win the national vote in the Senate. That doesn't help you. And predictions are based on, everything from census to voting patterns, is that if Biden loses a point or two, the Senate can lose a seat or two. And given that it's a 50-50 Senate, that's a big deal. Yes. And so people tend to forget that Shore's really talking about the Senate, not so much the presidency. Well, Biden could put together this coalition and that coalition. Fine, he could. And he could win again. But that doesn't explain what's going on in the Senate. And so that's what makes it salient to talk about
that was a
white working class voters.
Okay.
Not that, and Bowie says, so what are you saying here? You're supposed to go back to Sister Souljah with Clinton and, third way stuff? If that's what you mean, go ahead and say so. And he points out, this is a quote here, Shore sees the 2020 presidential election and Trump's significant gains with Hispanic voters as another example of what happens when race and racial issues dominate a campaign in its media environment. You'll know this is familiar, David, because we've talked about this on the show. In the summer following the emergence of defund the police as a nationally salient issue, support for Biden among Hispanic voters declined, Shore said in a March interview with New York Magazine. So I think you can tell this micro story. We raised the salience of an ideologically charged issue that millions of non-white voters disagreed with us on. And then, as a result, these conservative Hispanic voters who'd been voting for us despite their ideological inclination started voting more like conservative whites. And so Bowie says, I don't think this analysis is necessarily wrong. There's other evidence to press the point. In a piece for the Virginia Center for Politics, where he's a fellow, by the way, James Bowie, the political scientist Alan Abramowitz shows how the deep political divide between college and non-college white voters in recent elections reflects a deep ideological divide between the two groups. And this class divide appears to have little or nothing to do with economic self-interest and everything to do with the diverging racial attitudes of the two groups. And that's what I think Getzal means when he says you can't just go give people what they want. You could do child tax credits, and they're very popular, and that doesn't make people vote for you. Not if
it's true.
White working class voters think those other people are getting benefits.
Oh. Yeah, they might just not be satisfied. I got benefits, but so did that other person, and they shouldn't.
Right. Racial resentment and party identification are by far the strongest predictors of conservative ideology. So, what do you do about it? And he gives other evidence for that, and I've told you, the sentiment is great, but the defund the police is just a terrible slogan, and it probably did take a toll, but I think the pandemic took a bigger toll.
Oh, yes.
And so if people voted for Republicans because the Republicans were threatening to keep businesses open, and that's what they wanted because they needed to bring money home, that isn't that's obviously all defund the police. Well, it's not,
No.
So you have to read that fairly carefully. Still, the fact is they did vote for Republicans. That's the major thing here. And trying to figure out why and trying to figure out how not to have that happen, has a lot to do with the idea that, look, it doesn't matter for white working class voters how you talk about immigration. Okay. I hate the idea. Just don't talk about it. Talk about things that matter to you and that they like. Talk about child tax credits. Talk about how you're getting the pandemic under control. Talk about how you're going to create jobs. If they don't like, to extend this a little bit, all this focus on the environment, which they think is woke lefty stuff, talk about the fact that green policies create jobs. It's the same policy. It's just a better sell.
Okay.
If you talk about jobs, even though jobs may not be the focus. Well, but we're trying to protect the environment so that we don't all die. Well, yes, but jobs.
Yes.
Because jobs make you vote for the policies that you think are important so that we don't all die. And don't be so stubborn as to say, well, I not only want you to vote for me, I want you to vote for me for the right reasons.
Yes, I insist.
No, don't go there, please. That's where you start to get too stubborn. And you got to, be a little bit more flexible about what's going on without abandoning your core group.
Yes.
Because jobs are important to everybody. So it's more of a universalism, right? Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to focus on this because this particular faction really likes this, focus on the universal. A faction of the Democratic Party, a large faction, especially young voters, really think the environment is important. But jobs are important to everybody. And if jobs are more important to a bigger group of people, then focus on that. And you can mention the environment. We're really into the environment because jobs, and then you get both groups.
They seem to have been pretty adept at that, I think.
Right. But, the point is that's the way that you have to go. And none of that is about immigration.
You should start doing this. You have done it. They're just a good example of it. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so if you're going to talk about immigration, talk about jobs. If you're going to talk about immigration, talk about that most of the public actually thinks immigration is a good idea, but the white working class doesn't. And so Shore's prescription is, well, maybe you shouldn't talk about it. And that's why people take exception to some of the things that he's saying. But the point about white working class voters being different than college-educated white voters is important, and the fact that there are more white working class non-college than college, and the fact that those voters happen to be in particular states that are important to win, is part of the reason why people are discussing what David Shore is saying.
Okay.
So it's just an explainer as to how come his name keeps coming up.
Well, finally. Now I seem to get it. This is certainly... Well, it gives us something to think about, and it is kind of funny, though. I will say that it is traditional at about this time in the election cycle to write pieces from the outside of the inner circle of a little too loud there on that, but of Democratic advisors, and actually from Republican side too. But the traditional piece at this point is why the strategy of the people you are currently contracting with to run your campaigns is not nearly as good as you would get if you were contracting with me to run your campaign. So that's a common thread, certainly, but then, your effectiveness depends on how well you explain what you would do for people if you were hired. And I guess he's doing better than most.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil, minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Hey everybody, someone on the internet is wrong. I just found out via Twitter. I thought this was kind of interesting and fun. I know one of those dumb memes where you circulate a photo of some horrible situation and say this is happening because of Joe Biden's America, but you forget what you took a picture of. Who is this person? Kimberly Klatchik. Okay, I recognize her now. Former congressional Republican nominee in Maryland's 7th District, Congressional District, who I guess still dining out on the idea of being a black conservative. At any rate, Kimberly Klatchik, Klacik, circulating a picture that she labels, "Look at hashtag Build Back Better." Very angry with this picture of bare shelves in the meat department of the local supermarket. The local supermarket, of course, for whatever reason, I didn't even realize this was part of the legislative package. All prices are in pounds sterling. So a little weird. But I guess that's what's going on in Baltimore. She must be right about that because she's conservative and well-educated and therefore knows what she's talking about. Obviously has grabbed a photo of what Brexit is probably doing to Britain. But
look at the color of that meat. COLOUR.
Right, true. It's my favorite. Anyway, there's hardly anything. There are a few packages on the shelves, and I don't know if they're discolored or not. But at any rate, never seen anything quite like this in a local supermarket, just in terms of pricing everything in pounds. Kind of gives it away, but,
Well,
she doesn't know what that
though,
squiggly
because they priced
line
everything
was
in pound sterling, and the stuff just flew off the shelves.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody said, "Oh, the pound is quite strong," versus I don't know how they're doing internationally, but yeah, and picked up by Jesse Taylor, who points out, janky Joe Biden switched America to the pound sterling. That's the problem.
Didn't tell anybody.
Yep. All right.
Well,
so
wait till you hear about what he does with centimeters.
That's oh my goodness, right?
Going metric.
On the other hand, we do have to take a break for tea in the middle of the show, so that's pretty good.
That's a good idea.
Yep.
So this article caught my attention by Zachary Carter in the New York Times. Why are moderates trying to blow up Biden's centrist economic plan? And I have a theory about this article.
They don't.
And he talks about, at the close of 1933, the New York Times published an open letter from British economist John Maynard Keynes to President Franklin Roosevelt, offering high praise and dire warning. In the first 9 months of his presidency, Keynes argued Roosevelt had proven himself a hero for people who believed in rational change to the existing social system, but Keynes saw danger ahead. Without a robust economic recovery, Roosevelt's reform program would disintegrate. So Roosevelt took the advice, he ramped up spending, and, the rest is history, except if you're a revisionist.
Right.
So Biden, like Roosevelt, President Biden entered office in a flood of crises. The pandemic was claiming thousands of American lives every day. Each of these calamities threatens not only the political viability of Biden's political party, but also the future of American democracy. Biden recognizes the stakes, has bet everything on his economic agenda, and the centrists are trying to screw it up.
Oh. All right.
Right?
Yeah,
now,
I mean,
the president's
I've heard
critics
that story.
Have explained their opposition by invoking the supposed sanctity of arcane House procedure, telling constituents that their votes for or against certain parts of the plan are meaningless, and issuing economic critiques that make no sense.
Yes.
Writing in the Wall Street Journal, Manchin upbraided Democratic leadership for running up the crippling national debt, even though Biden had said that the plan will include enough tax increases to make it budget neutral. Now, here's the meat of the article. There's a simple reason Mr. Biden's centrist critics can't seem to explain themselves. The Build Back Better Act is centrism taken seriously. It's an effort to fix American democracy through economic support rather than structural political change, which is not to say Biden's agenda lacks ambition. It seeks to refit the American economy as an engine of green growth, reassert American geopolitical leadership, support families who want to work, lofty aims, but that's a centrist agenda. In fact, I would step back and say, if you really want to know what's in the Build Back Better Act, it's helping parents afford childcare and helping those very same parents, as they get a little older, try to take care of their own parents without going bankrupt. That's really what the Build Back Better Act is about. Plus, there's got some environmental stuff in there, too. So none of the left's priorities in the 2020 presidential primary, like Medicare for all, decriminalized border crossings, tax on wealth, appear in this plan. Nor has the president embraced any of the structural reforms that progressive Democrats have been calling for, such as eliminating the Electoral College, reforming the filibuster, expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court. Now, that's in there.
Well, it can't be. But, well, I mean, I guess
you can't get into reconciliation. But the point is they're not in there. So when Republicans talk about a radical socialist agenda, they're FOS, because none of that stuff is in there.
That's always the case. Yeah.
Right? But they have trouble explaining why they're against it, because none of the explanations for why they're against it really makes a whole lot of sense. That's really what the article says. It doesn't explain why they can't really summarize it. It just points out that they can't really articulate it. So my working theory is the David Shor theory. The reason that these centrists are against the plan is they think that white working class voters will perceive it as helping other people.
Okay.
And they can't say that. So everything comes out as incoherent. I'm just against it.
I think that's a pretty good explanation. I mean, why not? That's a good guess. I mean, they certainly haven't given a reason, and it must just be.
Well, they can't. You can't say that to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's a declaration that you want to join the other party.
Yeah, pretty much. But these are centrists and centrist states, and they think that that kind of agenda would be used against them, and they're afraid of it. And that's my working theory of why people like Manchin and Sinema are so difficult, and you can't count on them to, in the end, vote for you.
Yeah.
You have to cajole them. You have to persuade them. You can't threaten them. And, in the end, I think that they'll vote for us, but it's going to take a lot of work to get them there.
Okay. We'll have to...
And the best way to do it is to do it quietly. That part of the David Shore thing I agree with. Don't follow them into the bathroom. Don't make a public display of it. That just makes it more difficult. It doesn't help, right? Okay. This quiet discussion that's been happening over the last week where nobody's talking about what's really going on with these two plans, I think is great because that suggests that maybe some work is actually getting done. And we won't know that till the end. But it's a lot better than in public saying, this is a terrible plan and I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
That was for early. You have to, establish your Jared Golden independence early. But if you do that right before the bill is supposed to come together, it's bad. So I'm happy not to see that. That doesn't mean that it all comes together. But, it's more of a positive sign than a negative sign that you're not hearing anything about it right now. Okay.
Well, I'll take positive signs.
So anyway, that's my operating theory. On the other hand, this one is from the Washington Post. Group close to McConnell to spend $10 million attacking vulnerable Democratic senators on domestic spending.
Okay.
So we know that these
senators,
they include people like Mark Kelly, Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire. They're all facing voters in 2022, and the war chest is starting to build up. And so the Republicans are starting to run on it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it works. And, of course, here all politics is local. Nevada and New Hampshire have different issues than Virginia, but Virginia has the Northern Virginia college-educated vote. And so, that's a question of motivating them, not convincing them. In other places, persuasion might be more of the issue. And at the same time, the Bulwark, Tim Miller points out here, dear Democrats, only 10% of people even know what you're fighting for. Even if Democrats can pass the bill, they won't be able to sell it. Right? Well, because you who are listening here, you who can answer the CBS News poll about how much they know about Build Back Better, 10% said they knew a lot of the specifics, 10%. And let me tell you a secret, says Tim Miller. Even that number's wrong because a bunch of those people are lying.
Oh, rats.
So we have 1 in 10 as our absolute ceiling when it comes to the share of Americans who know what's in the bill. Yeah, and that seems like a problem. Right? And when the pollster listed out the specifics, people knew about the price tag and nothing else. That's because of the way media covers this. Now, the Democrats are spending some money on trying to get the public to know what's in it. And interestingly, I think I mentioned the other day, and if I didn't, I meant to, Simon Rosenberg said, part of the problem with focusing on the Build Back Better is that it takes focus off the pandemic.
Yes.
So, it seems like a lose-lose for Democrats. Well, if you talk about this and tell people what's in it, then you lose focus on the pandemic. But if you focus on the pandemic, then nobody knows what's in this bill. So you can't win because that's the way media covers you.
Yeah. I'm starting to wonder, though, about the blaming it entirely on the media or anybody about not talking enough about it as the bill hasn't actually, been committed to paper yet, really. There's a lot of ideas about what they wanted to put in it, but a lot of it's been
I said early on, that's why Biden's not talking about it. He's not giving speeches about it because he doesn't know what's in it yet.
Right. I mean, nothing could be worse
and
than
everybody
saying,
makes fun of Nancy Pelosi when she says, well, you have to read the bill to see what's in it. What she means is, with this kind of negotiation and a complicated bill, you really do have to read the bill to see what's in it.
The whole week is about, well, what should we take out? You don't want to, campaign on, we're going to this, that, and the other thing, and then not have it in there. That's probably the worst thing you could do.
Exactly right. That I was for it before I was against it, all that sort of other stuff. So I get all of that. But, it would be good to talk about, well, the focus of our bill, what we're trying to do here is help the environment and create jobs to do it. And we're trying to make sure that regular, ordinary people can afford childcare and also have a plan to take care of their elderly. And then we're going to figure out how to pay for it. And that's really what this whole discussion is about. And it's a good discussion because these are good concepts. And they can say that, and they're not, and I don't know why, but without getting specifics.
Well, we need to know why. We need to poll them and figure out why they're not saying it.
Well, we know why. We know why. They're not talking about that because, what that means is that you want to help those other people.
Okay. Why they're not saying it. Okay. Yeah, rats. Well,
but, that's the situation. And if you look at it through that lens, I think it just makes a whole lot more sense.
All right. Well, yes, we can help explain things this way. Well, I don't know.
Anyway, we think that it's all related. So the pandemic matters as well. We talked about how for the Latino Hispanic population it mattered. For lower working class people it mattered because they didn't want their jobs canceled. Benji Sarlin points out for all the noise, we're quietly climbing towards 80% of adults vaccinated. And that's before new rounds of mandates kick in. The first big freakout over vaccine resistance was when the U.S. failed to hit 70% by July 4th.
Okay. Well, I guess we were supposed
and that
to
was a
do
message.
I remember that now.
There's nothing wrong with saying our target is 70% by July 4th. We may not get there, but we'll get very close. Had you said that and you got very close, you would have been right exactly where you said you were going to be.
I guess so, unless they just said, well, I don't know. You said 70 in July, and that didn't
It was
happen,
69.73,
so
and, gee, you failed. Well, it was a little earlier than that. Actually, it turns out when you look at vaccination statistics from CDC for right now, 12 and up, 76% have at least one dose. 18 and up, which is adults, 78% have at least one dose. That's what Benji Sarlin means about getting close to 80. 65 and up, 95% have at least one dose.
All right.
And 65 and up are the people who are most at risk for severe disease.
Yeah.
So again, the discussion, the complicated discussion, which you can't really simplify, is that the CDC and Public Health and Biden and everybody else were aiming at the 65 and up and the most vulnerable, not school-age kids, in order to prevent them from going into the hospital. And parents of school-age kids who also have elderly parents simply don't want infection in their family so they can get together for Thanksgiving without worrying about it.
That would be
so
nice.
The public wants to be infection-free, and the public health people want you to be hospital and death-free. These are not the same goals, and so things get muddled when you try to talk about, well, what do these things do? Important because today's Wednesday, and starting tomorrow, J&J and Team Moderna boosters are going to be discussed by the FDA, and next week, school-age kid vaccines. So, that's all important. Now, interestingly, feeling threatened by primaries on the right, Greg Abbott did an executive order that says, I think you have to wear your underwear on the outside. And also, you can't do vaccine mandates. Even governments, even local governments, even businesses can't do vaccine mandates.
Because freedom. We're going to tell you
the
what
Dallas
you can't
Regional
do.
Chamber of Commerce distanced itself and said, from a business perspective, a full economic recovery can only happen if more people get vaccinated so our communities stay healthy and businesses can stay open. And that includes businesses that are headquartered in Texas. So again,
some large ones.
You want to talk about the pandemic, Governor Abbott, let's talk about jobs.
All right. Yeah, I see.
Right?
Now you're carrying this message over.
Jobs. Yes, I understand the goal is so that people don't get sick and they don't die. But jobs. Why? Because that's what sells.
Right. All very rarely are jobs held by dead people.
Yeah. So, again, to come back to a theme here, it's the economy, stupid, but not necessarily directly. But you want a simple message that people understand? Jobs. Whether you're talking about the environment, whether you're talking about the pandemic, whether you're talking about economic recovery, build back better, whatever it is, jobs. And I challenge you to make it not about jobs, because I'll bring it back to jobs, because it's the economy, stupid, and let's keep it simple. And do white working class voters care about you? Yes, they do. Jobs are universal. It's a universal thing. It isn't them, us. It's everybody. Jobs. So, again, that's my theme today.
All right. Well, we'll have to test that out and see how adept people are at jobsing their way out of various cultural war distractions. I mean, it can be done. We just need to practice, I suppose. We should try thinking about that. Yes.
That's it.
Oh, okay.
That's
well, good.
Theme. That's everything. Oh, by the way, the fourth wave, the elective spike, is dropping. Charlie Bilello here is helpfully summarizing this up. You use Worldometers, which is a very good site. I use others. COVID-19 hospitalizations in the U.S. are down 41% from their peak in early September. In early September, we were looking at hospitalizations at 98,000 per 100,000 people, and the raw number, 98,000. In the peak, it was 132,000, which was terrible, but September were 98, and now it's 58. So not only are cases dropping, but hospitalizations are dropping, and I would suspect deaths are dropping too. And by the way, Florida's vaccination rate is probably much lower than they indicated because they were counting people who were snowbirds who came down to Florida, got vaccinated, then went back to New York.
Right.
Those are New Yorkers.
That's okay. I mean, I'm glad that they're vaccinated.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm glad they're vaccinated, but that doesn't vaccinate Florida.
Right.
So the Florida vaccination rate's probably lower than you think, which explains why their hospitalizations and deaths are higher than you thought.
Yeah. Well, it was nice of them to give out all their vaccine to us, though. Thank you.
Yeah, it was. We appreciate that.
Good luck. I mean, I'll give you some more if you guys want to vaccinate the local guys. But
so that's it.
That's not.
Abby's finishing up her bone, and we're going to go work on the. When does Shatner go into space, by the way?
That's a good question. I don't know whether he was already there or whatever, but I've seen a lot of talk about
Everybody's probably seen this by now, but I just thought, for some reason, it just struck me as hysterically funny that the suggestion was that when William Shatner gets back, everybody dressed like Planet of the Apes, so when he gets out of the plane, everybody sees, Dr. Zayas and everybody else.
Yeah. I did see that they had a publicity photo of him out in I don't know whether it was really the uniforms they were going to wear on this flight, but I did notice that they had him dressed in yellow and the other crew members in red. But I don't know if those people didn't watch Star Trek or something. But I mean, that's like
you don't want to
bad
dress
news,
in red.
right? Yeah, I mean,
Star Trek.
Give them the blue or
because,
something.
Because
right?
those guys are like they're dead by the first 35 seconds.
Right.
So don't put Shatner in red.
Yeah, that's
don't make him a red.
They had
shirt.
him in yellow, and I don't know why they didn't figure out that why didn't Shatner say anything? You guys you should put on blue.
I should be dressed in blue.
This. Yeah, or at least the rest of you should.
Because the blue people survive, the red people all die.
Ugh. Well, they didn't get that message. They should have done some polling on it or something, or maybe
Shatner
they asked.
had a old Twilight Zone reference, by the way, when people asked him.
Oh yeah.
Said, "Are you afraid? Are you worried?" He said, "Not at all. I just don't want to look out the window and see gremlins."
Okay. Yeah, bringing us back. Well, why no T.J. Hooker reference for the rest of us? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, that's it.
Weird.
Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, very good. We'll count on that for tomorrow. Enjoy the peanut butter and non-rawhide. You too.
And, as far as if you want to make the pandemic better.
No, yes.
Play it.
I do. Oh, yes, right. Oh, okay.
Oh, my fucking God. Get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks.
That's right. Okay? And don't give it to out-of-staters.
That's why it was an elective spike. Let's not have a fifth wave.
Ah, okay, yeah. Now I get it. I was lost for the first second of that segment about a fourth elective wave. An electoral wave? What? Oh, no. Elective. Ah. Okay, gotcha. Right. Well, give yourself vaccines. Keep them on hand. Don't give them all away to tourists coming through. But I guess if you have to, might as well give it to New Yorkers. They really needed it at the time. And they're doing great, by the way. Thanks. So maybe they could claim credit for that. All right, Greg, we'll see you tomorrow and dive in now for the rest of the day's news into Pocket and the comments. I read the comments section on this show. There's a lot going on. And let's see. I don't even know how to begin with you. Oh, let's see. Scott sent me something here, too. Some info about the Shatner question, I guess. Let's check this out here. So he's just texted me, watch live. I guess, is that happening today? Watch live. Blue Origin to launch William Shatner to space. P.S. There's also other people going. They're not just flinging him into the upper atmosphere. There are others. And see, that's another thing. I thought that if you were making Star Trek style uniforms, where's that picture? I got to look for that. The obvious answer would be to put everybody else in blue because it's Blue Origin. Why would you bother with red uniforms? Anyway, 10 Eastern is when, I guess, the feed goes live. Is that for launch time or thereabouts? So you got about 9 minutes to decide whether you're going to continue with the show or watch William Shatner finally make it into space for real. So I recommend, I guess staying with the show. That reminds me, speaking of the way we handled the show yesterday, in my rush to get out the door for the day's activities yesterday, I believe I saved the podcast podcast file incorrectly, and I didn't have my usual commercial breaks, as we call them, in place in the show. So I don't know whether that made people happy or not. What would have been, I think, in its place is whatever was going on in the background off of the feed, but in studio at the time. Now, most of the time, I just have the microphone muted during the breaks anyway, but occasionally I don't. And so, anyway, for those of you who may have downloaded the show and heard, let's see, you might have been interested in the third break, would just have been chatter between me and Joan before we start her segment in the last half hour. So that might have been entertaining and interesting. The rest of it might have just been music in the background, or lots of hems and throat clearings and everything, which now reminds me, now as I go back, I've been doing my best to scrub through the show very quickly, listening for those and eliminating them from the podcast. I figure any place I can erase that stuff just to save your ears. And now I realize I'll be scrolling through and I'll get to this one, which I did intentionally, and I'll have to remember. Well, if I had an algorithm to do it, it would save me a lot of time. But I guess I'll figure it out when I get to this one, because I do it live and by hand. Anyway, lots of stories to check in on. And I guess let's do this, because we were talking so much about jobs and the importance of about focusing on jobs when we're getting into how to sell accomplishments and programs and policy, and I guess answer charges, bogus or otherwise, from Republicans. And I don't know if they do the otherwise anymore. This is a jobs-focused piece. Washington Post reporting on the news that came out the other day and was immediately, I guess, seized upon by Republicans to insist that something bad, Joe Biden, yada yada, prices in pounds sterling, etc. A record number of workers are quitting their jobs. That was the part that they seized on. They don't even want to work anymore. But there's a comma and then some more verbiage afterwards. Comma, empowered by new leverage. And empowering is like a good thing. Even Republicans used to say that. Although now I think in the culture wars, they've gotten away from using the words like empowering, because that sounds woke. So we're not allowed to do that anymore, even though empowerment used to be the term that was focus tested by Newt Gingrich and Frank Luntz at the time as a key terminology for Republicans, forward-looking Republicans. Anyway, yeah, I did see that fight going on Twitter. Republicans seizing on things and saying, see, people are quitting their jobs because welfare, even though most of that, they've forced a lot of that to get cut off. And, of course, there's now actual empirical data that shows that it has little to nothing to do with people leaving their jobs. Hence, I guess, we get to this headline. A record number of workers are quitting, but they're doing so because they've been empowered by new leverage. 4.3 million people quit their jobs in August, nearly 3% of the workforce, which is a gigantic chunk for just a month. But let's read about what are the analyses being tossed around here. Eli Rosenberg, Abba Batarai, perhaps, and Andrew Van Dam are the byliners on this piece for the Post. The number of people quitting their jobs has surged to record highs, pushed by a combination of factors that include Americans sensing ample opportunity, that's a good thing, and better pay, another good thing, elsewhere. Some 4.3 million people quit jobs in August, about 2.9% of the workforce, according to new data released Tuesday from the Labor Department. Those numbers are up from the previous record set in April of about 4 million people quitting, reflecting how the pandemic has continued to jolt workers' mindset about their jobs and their lives. The phenomenon is being driven in part by workers who are less willing to endure inconvenient hours and poor compensation. Those are two things workers don't like a lot. And who are quitting instead to find better opportunities. According to the report, there were 10.4 million job openings in the country at the end of August, slightly down from July's record high, which was adjusted up to 11.1 million, but still a tremendously high number. This gives workers enormous leverage as they look for a better fit. a job seekers market. Good for job seekers. That's why we've awarded them this market. The implications of this shift could be long-lasting. Normally, churn in the labor market reflects workers feeling more confident in the economy, willing to risk the security of their current job for a new opportunity. But the scale of these new changes and the larger economic transitions they signal has added an element of unpredictability. Workers and employers are reassessing their approaches amid a continually evolving public health threat. And I'm sure they get to this somewhere in the article, but I feel compelled to jump in and do it now. I want to hear about it now. So, it occurs to me that a lot of people basically made this point on Twitter when they were first discussing the emergence of this new data. Surely this must have something, I think, at some level to do with, well, let's say, the phenomenon we see illustrated all too frequently in videos and other stories circulated on Twitter of particularly of conservative anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, believers in the hoax theory of COVID-19, etc., who go out and make it their hobby to harass workers and get in the way of their doing their jobs or keeping people safe at their jobs, and people who are in, particularly those who are there in low-wage jobs or jobs that otherwise are, let's say, not a great fit for their lifestyle choices, let's say. Why put up with this abuse for next to no money, right? Now, in addition to being a low-level employee accepting a low wage, you now have to be policing people about masks, which is bad enough even with compliant people. You don't want to be the person annoying everybody at the door, but when you get the resistors, that's the old adage. They don't pay me enough for this crap, man, so I'm out of here. Well, I think that'd be real interesting. Why not? You should be shifting the blame for any of this instability in the job market, so insofar as it's a bad thing, onto the protesters. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. People still enjoying the whole pounds sterling thing here. I guess it's a question now. Has Kimberly Classic landed yet? Does she realize how everybody's making fun of the rest of her stuff here? And I guess not. She hasn't noticed yet. Maybe because she's watching the Blue Origin channel. Scott Anderson reminds me now, a few seconds ago, that it was T-minus 30 on the Shatner liftoff. If anybody wants to switch over to that quickly, come and tell us how it went. I'm sure it went smoothly. And the 30 seconds is probably up. So that's it. You missed it. If you're listening on podcast, you're way behind. So, okay. Let's continue on with the jobs thing because, there's 4 more jobs available while these guys are in space. I mean, you can't take their astronaut jobs, but whatever they were doing before is up for grabs. If you're quick and you've got your resume ready and you know where to go, you might be able to snag one of them. All right. Let's see. Where was it? Oh, yes, the jobs report. Where did we leave off on this thing? Right, the phenomenon, the one we were talking about before, driven in part by workers who are less willing to endure inconvenient hours, all that stuff. That was all in there. The implications of the shift, right? Normally the churn, we discussed that, in the labor market means people are more confident, right? They're willing to give up the security of a current job in order to search out a new one, if they don't already have one lined up. Many businesses say they're finding this new dynamic challenging as they struggle to retain employees and find qualified candidates for open positions. Some businesses have found success by increasing pay and compensation, which is kind of economics 101. So good for you for paying attention in class. On the other hand, many workers, particularly those who lost jobs early in the pandemic, might need to find ways to retrain and add skills for new careers. Many workers have decided that low-paying jobs or work that requires a long commute are not desirable, but they could need new skills in order to fill jobs that they desire more. That could certainly be true. I don't know. All workers, please call the show and let us know how that's actually going. Then we'll have the right statistics. These changes are happening rapidly. The Labor Department data shows that about 892,000 workers in restaurants, bars, and hotels quit in August. I sure would. As well as 721,000 workers in retail. Basically all the people who are being harassed and bothered by anti-mask weirdos. An additional 706,000 employees in professional business services and 534,000 workers in healthcare and social assistance also left jobs. Right. Pretty much the same folks. In almost every sector tracked by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, workers are quitting at or near the highest levels on record going back to when tracking began in 2001. That's it. I would have thought we had that from earlier. But even in a time of records, the speed of quitting among low-wage service workers stands out. They're saying it very quickly. I quit. I'm out of here. And doing it in record numbers. Almost 2 in 5 workers, 38%, who quit in August, worked in retail or in restaurants and hotels. And by the way, I would say, I don't know if they separate this out, because I would imagine some significant percentage of workers who quit jobs in August went back to college. But what do I know? Anyway, quitting in manufacturing is not as high as in the low-pay service sectors at 2.5%, but it has accelerated every bit as quickly as factories race to poach one another's workers and increase production as supply chain issues reshuffle the global manufacturing landscape. Nick Bunker, Archie's grandson, I think, economist at the jobs site Indeed, and Grandpa Archie could never understand this whole thing, the online workers, said the numbers were a reflection of the options workers have in the current economic market, with job openings outnumbering unemployed workers and people reevaluating what they want to do. The high level of people quitting their jobs was probably due in large part to people leaving jobs and taking other positions. Well, duh. Although the data does not specify why people are quitting and where they are ending up. This really elevated rate of people quitting their job is a sign that workers have lots of confidence and they have relatively stronger bargaining positions than they had in the past, Bunker said. There's lots of demand and people are seizing that opportunity and quitting their job. Jennifer Booth quit her information technology job at a national retailer in August. So how do we count her? An IT worker or a retail worker? And she's not a retail worker, but she's in retail. You can get the idea. After months of working as many as 90 hours a week during the pandemic to help the company revamp its e-commerce system. The final straw came when the chain began moving hundreds of finance and tech jobs overseas, she said. To be working as much as humanly possible for all of 2020 and then get told we don't matter, it felt like crap, said Booth, 48, of Denver. Yeah, that would feel like crap. And also, of course, it would put you in mind of having your job taken away from you pretty soon. You would probably then start searching around, and with a massive surplus of jobs out there and people looking to recruit and paying extra in order to do so, it wouldn't take very long for you to find a job that would convince you to quit your IT job before they lay you off to move it overseas. So, seems like a formula for, well, it's certainly favorable conditions. And I think people like Booth probably in other economies, in the earlier situation, earlier in the decade, etc., but non-pandemic situations probably would have held on as long as possible, might have started worrying about things if you were forward-looking. You see the jobs being moved overseas, you'd perhaps cast around for new jobs, but if there weren't as many opportunities out there and not as many people looking to raise wages in an effort to recruit and hire, yeah, you might have held on as long as possible, gotten your layoff notice, and then, ironically, started collecting all the unemployment benefits that, well, you're entitled to, of course, but then Republicans would have been running around saying, sure, we're paying them not to work. It's a welfare state. But here, we have just the opposite, and people are leaving their jobs and taking better opportunities elsewhere without putting themselves on the unemployment rolls. And something, it's still, yeah, thanks, Joe Biden, and spinning the headlines as it's a bad thing. Too many people are quitting their jobs. By July, Booth, we're back with her. Oh, I skipped a little part that was fun about her. She began looking for a new job in January, briefly considered moving to Hawaii, which, that's a major undertaking and all, but it sounds kind of exciting. To move from Denver, where it can be cold and snowy, to Hawaii, where it can't, or usually isn't anyway. I imagine it's happened once or twice before, but that must have been an exciting prospect for her. And I would say things are looking up if you're considering moving to take a new job and you're thinking, maybe Hawaii is the place to do it. Anyway, by July, she had found a new position with comparable pay at an insurance company. 2 months in, she said she feels appreciated. The workplace is more collaborative and there are more opportunities to move up. And I guess she didn't have to leave Denver. I feel so doggone lucky. That's a quote. Doggone lucky to have found something better. She said, I lived through hell for 18 months until I finally realized I don't have to do that anymore. There are brighter pastures. Julia Pollack, a labor economist at ZipRecruiter. We're only talking to economists who work for online job sites, apparently. Well, she said the Labor Department data was another indication, sorry, I don't know why that, but another indication of how the pandemic has shaken up the labor market. All this talk about the great resignation and the epic labor shortage of 2021 is not hyperbole, she said. Well, what is it then? Let's find out. The pandemic has been extremely disruptive to the labor market, though the pressures have changed over the past 18 months. In March and April of 2020, more than 20 million workers lost their jobs. At one point, more than 1 million workers were being laid off each day because companies shuttered with the crashing economy. The jobless rate has improved since spring of 2020, but leverage shifted from employers to employees as the pandemic helped draw attention to the plight of low-wage workers. There are a number of other factors that workers are weighing, including health concerns amid the rise of the coronavirus's Delta variant, as well as uneven access to childcare. While job offerings were more consistent before the pandemic, the range of questions employees are facing, such as how they deal with remote and flexible work, compensation and bonus packages, give workers a broader range of positions to choose from. People are sorting themselves into conditions that suit them best, Pollack said, and that's why we're seeing this huge reshuffling. People are voting with their feet. I keep saying you're supposed to do that. ZipRecruiter's data shows that workers are increasingly looking to change industries from sectors such as retail and hospitality. Can you imagine offering hospitality in this environment? To others where work is more likely to be able to be done remotely, such as customer service. Some 20% say they're now looking for remote work options because of the pandemic. Another sizable chunk of workers say they're looking for more flexibility. Whitney Morency, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but sorry, Whitney, 29, of Queens, is one of those people. Oh, let's talk to her in a diner. She only recently found a new position as a corporate assistant at Macy's after losing her job in retail for the company Kate Spade early on in the pandemic. She said the job openings number belied the challenges for many workers, so it's not all sunshine out there. I can believe it. Job searches are tough at all times. So what does she have to say about it? Well, not always great for workers like her who were hoping to change industries. A shift influenced by the pandemic, but on her wish list from before, too. And so from Kate Spade to Macy's, not a change in industries, but a change in positions, certainly. Instead of retail at Kate Spade, corporate assistant at Macy's. A lot of companies were hiring, but seemed like they weren't taking anyone in. They say they were hiring, I guess, but you couldn't, get them to commit to you, give you a job, she says, saying that in more than a year of scanning job sites such as Indeed, whose economist we talked to earlier, and Monster, whose economist we didn't, and had no relation to the guy running, Epic Domain Registry, Robert Monster or whatever. Anyway, and after more of a year of scanning job sites like them, she felt that the level of experience companies were asking for was higher than it used to be. A change she believed was because of corporations dialing back remote training. Yeah, so they didn't want to be the ones to train you, so they just hoped that you were trained already, either through experience or education. The Labor Department data adds more context to a surprising aspect of the pandemic. Workers are emerging with more choices, as many employers say they are struggling to staff up. The labor market is still down about 5 million jobs from where it was before the pandemic, and that does not even account for the job growth that would have normally occurred over that span. Employers in many industries, including hotels, restaurants, and construction, have complained about the difficulty of hiring workers after the pandemic upended the labor market and made many people less willing to take low-wage jobs. Republican officials in many states sought to address the issue by curtailing federal unemployment benefits over the summer, but those cuts seem to have done little to resolve the issue. Maybe their policy ideas suck. In September, the country added just 194,000 jobs despite the record numbers of openings. So, something to keep in mind if you're thinking about policy making, as Greg put us in mind of earlier. Okay. There are plenty of other interesting stories waiting in pocket and lots of different directions to go. Let's see. There are so many. What did I put this aside for? Interesting, but not where I was going to go next. Let me jump back, though, to the former guy and how terrible he is and the many things that he and the people around him are doing that are terrible. I felt like I might perhaps want to add this one. Let's see. Our entree in it will be this Axios piece from Lachlan Markay. Pro-Trump PAC fined over foreign money offer. I feel like it's such a throwback now to be talking about things like this, but it's actually ongoing and constant with these Republicans. And with one Republican person in particular, which is what made this story even more interesting to me. But we'll go through it Axios style, a blurb and then a why it matters and then what's new kind of stuff. A pro-Trump political group has agreed to pay a $25,000 fine to settle allegations it illegally solicited $2 million from reporters posing as intermediaries for a Chinese national. That's a pretty serious charge, although I'm a little tired of hearing about people being handed fines for these things, especially the Trump-style people where fines are a cost of doing business. They just, let's do illegal things, and if we get caught, well, we were going to launder $2 million, and the penalty seems to be we give away $25,000 of it. That's I like those odds, say the Republicans. Now, Axios style, why it matters. Why it matters, it's hugely illegal and manipulative of our entire democratic system of elections and undermines democracy and damages all of us who've put our trust in the United States government. But Axios would like you to know why it matters is actually that a key player in the scheme, a veteran Republican operative, is actually also facing criminal charges over all of this, which is about time, right? Over allegedly funneling tens of thousands of dollars in foreign cash to Trump's re-election effort, making news of the fine the latest in an emerging pattern of conduct. Emerging pattern, wow. What's new? Great America PAC, a hybrid super PAC, reached an agreement with the Federal Election Commission to resolve the more recent allegations in June, according to a copy of the conciliation agreement released this week. The $25,000 civil penalty stemmed from an undercover investigation by the British Telegraph newspaper in late 2016. So again, this happened in 2016. It's 2021, and we're getting around to saying, well, I think maybe you should be fined $25,000. And by the way, I don't even know whether the Trump people ever pay their fines anyhow. Reporters, this is the background of the story. Reporters approached the PAC's principal, Eric Beach, posing as representatives for a Chinese national who wanted to donate to Great America. Beach worked with Republican operative Jesse Benton, whose name actually rings a bell, right, to devise ways to conceal the source of the funds, including funneling the money through a dark money nonprofit or through Benton's consulting firm. Great America PAC was one of the largest pro-Trump independent expenditure groups in the country, and they're not independent at all, and they're not even independent of foreign influence, as it turns out. It reported spending more than $9 million opposing or backing federal political candidates in the 2020 cycle, and more than $23 million during the 2016 cycle. Between the lines, as they like to put it here, here's the actual meat of the story. It shouldn't be between the lines. It should be explicit. It should be the headline. Benton. Why does his name ring a bell? Benton, a former senior aide to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, is also facing criminal charges over his alleged role in a scheme to, see if anybody can guess, same effing thing, his alleged scheme to funnel money from a Russian national to a Trump fundraising committee last year. This single guy, this McConnell functionary, is apparently in the business of attempting to funnel money from China and Russia into the Trump campaign. What a weird thing. That's so crazy. It's almost like an emerging pattern of behavior by this one particular person who was, I guess, brought up in the world by Mitch McConnell. Weird. Here's what they're saying. Now, the what they're saying section. It's interesting because, I guess they talk to the right people in the right diners or whatever. Here's what they're saying. Benton's conduct was dishonorable, unpatriotic, and clearly illegal, 3 of the FEC's 6 commissioners wrote in a joint statement on the Great America PAC settlement. Before we even go any further than that, we'll just slow that down and highlight it for you again. Benton's conduct was dishonorable, unpatriotic, and clearly illegal, right? That's very serious. How many of the FEC's 6 commissioners said that? 3. They can't get agreement unanimously when it's well, this guy, first he was approached by Russians. I understand we can't give money to Trump, but we want to anyway. It's illegal for us to do it. Can you help us launder it and fake our way through such that our Russian money reaches Donald Trump and presumably influences his thinking, such as it is, and policy making, such as it is? Yes, I can help you do that. As a former senior aide to the Senate Minority Leader, I can help you do that. Oh, well, that's interesting. How about me? I'm from China. Can you help me do that? Yes, I can. Right. It is dishonorable, unpatriotic, clearly illegal, but only probably, I'm guessing, if it's 3 out of the 6, 3 Democratic appointees to the Federal Election Commission are willing to say, well, it's kind of a black and white issue. We have laws against this. It's clearly illegal to do. It's clearly unpatriotic to do, given that the way you put yourself on the wrong side of the law is to launder foreign money into our election. And saying that you'll help people do this illegal thing is obviously dishonorable. But the 3 Republican members of the FEC cannot be convinced that it's either dishonorable, unpatriotic, or clearly illegal, and will not join in this conclusion. Come on. Anyway, so as they said, the 3 of them say that this is true, and so therefore, next bullet point here is the commission nonetheless deadlocked on whether to find probable cause of a violation by Benton individually. All the Republicans said, what are you talking about? He's a great guy. He works for us. There's no violation here. All the Democrats say, oh my God, it's written down in the law that you can't do this. But there you go. They're deadlocked now. Both sides. That's a highly polarizing issue, whether or not you should be allowed to break the effing black and white law and just take whoever's money and give it to whoever you want, even if it's foreign nationals and you're funding a presidential campaign with it. Some say you can, some say you can't. What are you going to do? We're deadlocked. It's unfortunate, to put it mildly, that the commission failed to follow through and hold Benton accountable for his actions, the 3 commissioners who actually read the law wrote. So there you go. We have this, fairly significant problem and a fairly obvious pattern of behavior. Mitch McConnell's guy in the consulting world now is in the business of helping foreign nationals launder money so that they can influence American presidential elections. And, maybe there'll be a fine. What if he doesn't pay it, right? The vote on, well, we should do something bad to him for not paying his fine, hold him accountable in some way or another, will probably be 3-3. And the committee will be deadlocked, and he'll never end up paying the fine anyway. So thank God that there's at least some criminal investigation going on, too. But then again, the criminal investigation has been going on for 5 years, and he's walking around continuing to do this. That's why I was so surprised by that section of what they're saying. What they're saying is, gee whiz, our hands are tied. What the rest of the country is saying, if you want to, by the way, you want to talk about popularism and see what a popular response is, your hands are tied. Are they tied with rope? I have a better idea of what we could do with this rope. Let's put it around Jesse Benton's neck and hang him from a tree because he's an effing criminal. That's what they're saying, to the extent that anybody's talking about this at all. The normal people are still stuck on John Gruden, which we can go back to. I threatened you that we would go back to this. Anyway, just wanted to let you know about this. And if you had some spare rope around, you might want to offer it up and see if you can find out where Jesse Benton is hanging out these days. But don't take the law into your own hands, everybody. We have, authorities who split 3-3 on what to do about this, who are supposed to take care of these things. But at least there's criminal charges pending. Don't worry about it. Merrick Garland will get right on it. Oh. All right. Well, anyway, I did mention to you that I threatened to take you back to John Gruden. Adam McGinnis, very active in tweeting us to prod us into coverage of various angles of this story. Thanks very much, Adam. He was saying yesterday, after Joan and I were sort of casting about for, well, is there any real political reason to continue talking about John Gruden? And there is in a broader sense, but he was reminding us there is this. Gruden, in his email exchanges, is inappropriate and offensive, misogynistic, racist, and homophobic, too, right? Email exchanges. There was, of course, another person. That's what makes it an email exchange. The other person in a lot of the exchange was Bruce Allen, I don't know, what is he, the general manager? He's one of the top execs with, remember, we had to be reminded, what are we talking about here? WFT, not WTF, but the Washington football team, the team formerly known as the Breadsticks, around these here parts, anyhow. And now operating as the Washington football team. And I guess there was a broader investigation going on, which I didn't really know about either, but was mentioned in the story. Anyway, the political angle here is Bruce Allen is George Allen's brother, or depending on which George Allen you're talking about. Either George Allen, the former coach of the Washington football team from many years ago, or George Allen's son, George Allen, who was senator from Virginia for, what did he do, 2 terms, perhaps? Anyway, we all know him on this show as Senator Macaca, George Allen, drummed out of politics, and rightly so. And holy mackerel, his brother Bruce, who was able to avoid getting involved in politics but went into the other family business of football, gosh, he, at least on the receiving end, if not more, of these racist, misogynistic, homophobic emails. But I guess the background of the story, I guess they didn't start by investigating John Gruden. They were investigating the Washington football team, what would you say, corporate atmosphere. They're just looking into reports that stem from complaints from a number of sources that the Washington organization not really paying attention to modern human resources practice, to say the least. And I guess I didn't read enough of the story, but as it turns out, the question started as, is the front office here at the Washington organization fostering a dangerous and unsafe workplace by having its top executives freely trading emails like this, up to and including, I guess, I think we barely mentioned it in the story yesterday, topless photos of some of the cheerleaders, which, I don't know how you come by something like that, but that's not going to make anybody feel particularly safe and happy working for your organization, certainly not as a cheerleader anyway. So there you go. There's the political angle on this. And I guess the broader political angle, of course, is that there's cultural issues that can only be fixed through, well, political action, certainly. Well, every time we do it, the voters, everybody seems to be resistant to this idea of, you shouldn't be racist, homophobic, or misogynistic in your emails. Actually, some defenses or, attempts at stupid defenses from conservatives yesterday. Who cares what's in his email? What is this, a thought crime? The thought police are after us now? Well, if you're emailing nude photos, no. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just come to find out that the Blue Origin still hasn't launched. I just checked on the link that Scott sent to me and opened up the live video, and I guess they pushed it back half an hour. Then it says Blue Origin is currently targeting 10:31 EDT for today's launch, but that's like in a couple seconds, I guess, about 30 seconds from now. And it looks now like they're waiting another 15 minutes or something, but nothing. I guess they haven't put it in the text here yet, but I don't know. I'm trying to figure out the numbers here, but it doesn't look like they're launching immediately. So that was an interesting aspect of Star Trek that didn't get played out on the screen, like launch delays. You didn't see the Enterprise like, well, let's, head for Starbase. Well, I'm not a big enough Star Trek fan to be able to do this off the top of my head, so I'm going to make dumb stuff up. We're headed to the Starbase. What the hell is that? And let's say they're numbered, right? Like public schools in New York City. Starbase, it's never like 2. That's never it. We're going to that Star. Let's go there. I also wondered about why they don't go there any place like medium warp every once in a while, right? We're going places maximum warp or sometimes warp 1, warp 2, but in the later Star Treks when they have higher numbers and can go maximum warp 10, whatever is their maximum. You never go. Well, what would cause you to say, let's go, but like warp 7? Don't want to burn up too much fuel. I don't know what would make you do that. Don't you want to get there as fast as possible all the time? Why are you not maximum warping everywhere? I'm sure there's a drawback to it, whatever. But that doesn't. I'm sure like the fan fiction and stuff and the books probably have that stuff. But you're not going to catch me reading that. You can barely get me to watch the TV show. But anyway, you never see them do that. Like, let's head out to the Starbase at warp 2, and then they go, well, we got to stir the tank. Something screwed up. I don't know. Nobody plugged in the warp thing. Whatever. It's going to be another 15 minutes. We're pushing it back. So, an unrealistic aspect of space travel, I guess. But I guess by the future they have fixed this sort of thing. And who cares about delays in launching if you can warp there, right? What's the difference? You're going to get there ahead of time anyhow. All right. Well, just keeping one eye on how things are going there. The video moved a little bit, but it still looks like they're waiting on getting this thing launched. So, okay, the exciting news, we're going to have to look elsewhere for that. Okay, right. Oh, yes, on our way out the door for the previous break, I mentioned, there's people defending these emails. Matt Walsh who is a conservative weirdo of some kind, and I guess on Twitter, had his tweets about the subject captured and passed around in photo form. He's saying, nobody was a victim of Gruden's vulgar comments in his private emails. The people who received the emails didn't care because they were also racist, misogynist, and homophobic, presumably, and I guess that's Bruce Allen. Nobody else knew about them. Nobody was hurt or even offended. Call it what it is. Gruden is getting canceled for thought crimes. That's a very fashionable thing, I guess, to say among conservatives. Of course, writing your thoughts down and disseminating it along with topless photos of the cheerleaders is actually kind of the opposite of thought crime. It's just sort of like, it's not a crime in terms of being racist and writing it down, although you can certainly be held liable for fostering a hostile work environment. But, of course, if you take somebody else's presumably illicitly acquired topless photos and mail that around, in some cases that is a crime. That's just a crime, not a thought crime so much as a crime. And if the idea, I mean, what was the point in disseminating an email like this? I'm sure you probably could convince yourself that it wasn't your intention to create a hostile work environment. But one, I would dispute that, and clearly it is your intention. You just don't think it's your intention because you don't think it's a hostile work environment because you're a white male. And for you, passing around topless photos of cheerleaders is just a fun afternoon's activity. It doesn't matter to you, much less would it ever occur to you that it might not be all that fun or safe or healthy for the cheerleader whose pictures you've stolen. But whatever. Anyway, yeah, this is his idea of a thought crime. Actual activity, committing your thoughts to writing and disseminating it for the purpose of sharing it with others in the workplace. What a thought. Punctuated by action, which makes it easy, far easier to pursue as a crime. So actually, not. I guess the thought crime here is how bad your thoughts were about that, Matt Walsh, but he doesn't care. That's his line of work, irritating the rest of us. Okay. So anyway, a couple other stories to jump to. Here's an important one, I think. Something I put aside from the Daily Kos front page the other day. Seems of some interest, just in terms of like, guys, what are you doing? Election workers at Georgia's Dem-held Fulton County, the one that the Trump and the Trumpniks keep insisting that's the one that needs to be audited down in Georgia. And when we called for auditing and recounting, you checked different counties. We want to target Fulton County because it's Democratic held and very heavily black, and that's what they're after. But unfortunately, now they have fuel for the fire. Election workers at Georgia's Dem-held Fulton County are fired after shredding 300 voter applications. Rebecca Sager writes for Daily Kos yesterday. Giving Georgia's Republican-dominated state legislature just got the dirt it needs to steal more of the Democratic-heavy Fulton County elections. 2 election workers were fired Friday for shredding voter registration forms. I don't know. Did that make sense? I mean, the action, I understand. The giving Georgia's Republican-dominated state legislature, I guess, I don't know, maybe she had 2 versions of it and didn't edit it down to one. But maybe you giving Georgia's Republican-dominated state legislature the dirt it needs to steal more control. And maybe the other version was Georgia's Republican-dominated state legislature just got the dirt it needs. But adding the giving at the front confused me a little bit. Anyway, you get the idea. Well, here's the dirt. 2 election workers fired Friday for shredding voter registration forms. Monday, County Elections Director Richard Barron told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution he'd fired the workers at the Fulton County Board of Elections after they'd allegedly been seen and reported by their coworkers. So it's not like all the coworkers, all the elections workers in Fulton County are corrupt or lazy or whatever. Because as it turns out, it's much more laziness than anything else. that's doing this. But they're not all like that because they saw it and they said, hey, you can't do that. We're going to report you. And they got fired as a result. So they saw it. They reported it. They reported what? Destroying about 300 voter registration applications. Voting begins Tuesday, that was yesterday, for municipal races in Fulton County for Atlanta's mayor and city council. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who we know all about, and remember, he's not always a great guy, or maybe never a great guy. He just happens to have done us a favor by being reluctant to get caught out on the wrong side of the law, but if you will put the law on his side, he'd be happy to help steal elections for Donald Trump. Raffensperger publicly called on the U.S. Justice Department, the DOJ, even though they have their own Justice Department there in the state, to investigate the alleged shredding with a searing letter, writing, after 20 years of documented failure in Fulton County elections, Georgians are tired of waiting to see what the next embarrassing revelation will be. The Department of Justice needs to take a long look at what Fulton County is doing and how their leadership disenfranchises Fulton voters through incompetence and malfeasance. The voters of Georgia are sick of Fulton County's failures. Though we're not really sure that they are, we know that Republicans enjoy nothing quite so much as pointing the finger at Fulton County, whatever finger it may be. Republicans have had Barron in their crosshairs since the 2020 election, even attempting to fire him at the county level. Thanks to new power given by Senate Bill 202, a restrictive voting bill passed by Georgia's GOP-controlled General Assembly and signed by Governor Brian Kemp, an audit of Fulton County has begun at the state level, which could lead to a takeover of the county's elections. That's got a link in case you want to read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's recounting of exactly how that might happen. And I kind of do, but we got to move on. This is likely the first step in an attempt to weaken the most important Democratic-held county in the state. And don't forget what the results of holding Fulton County and piling up the votes from among their Democratic electorate has been of late in Georgia. That's the reason they're targeting it, of course. I don't think there's another state in the union that has a state election board with the power to turn a nonpartisan elections office into a partisan arm of the Secretary of State's office. Barron told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A Fulton County poll worker who wishes to remain anonymous told Daily Kos in original reporting, that they heard the workers didn't want to input the information, so it was easier to just shred the forms. It is terrible. But, at least we kind of, it gives us a slightly different understanding of what's going on. It's not, as Republicans would prefer you probably believe, that Democratic workers were singling out Republican registrations, because there's no indication on the forms of what party they're registering for. They don't have party affiliation on them. And so it's not that they were picking out Republicans and shredding them in order to keep Democrats in power in Fulton County. Democrats are going to be in power in Fulton County regardless. And the odds are that those registrants were probably Democratic voters given the demographics. But they just didn't feel like doing the work, which is outrageous. But anyway, at least it's not probably a partisan motivation. But that won't stop Raffensperger from pretending that it is and making a partisan accusation of his own. So, as we said, they just wanted to shred it because they'd rather not do the work of putting in the info. And as they say, it's important to note that voter registration applications do not identify party affiliation. As you probably recall, Raffensperger has been subject to the wrath of former President Donald Trump after refusing to, quote, find more ballots in order to help overturn President Biden's win in the state. Raffensperger is up for re-election in 2002, so he's shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The last internal poll I saw said that 87% of Republican primary voters felt like the election was stolen. Former Republican Representative Lynn Westmoreland of Georgia told Politico, with those kinds of numbers, I don't see Brad getting through the primary. In a recent Trump rally in Perry, Georgia, the former twice impeached and one-term president called Raffensperger, quote, incompetent and strange, which is a weird combination. Georgia's presidential election has been counted 3 times, and 3 times there's been no evidence of fraud. However, we all know Republicans don't play fair since SB 202, the bill attempting to disenfranchise Georgia's black and primarily Democratic voters. So with that now on the books, that's their aim. And Raffensperger, I guess, trying to save himself in the Republican primary by getting tough on Fulton, even though, or Fulton County election workers, even though it was Fulton County election workers who witnessed and disclosed the crime that led to the punishment. And, caught and taken care of. What more do you want? But anyway, that will be, like we said, fuel for the fire. Let's see. The other items that we might want to sneak in our last couple minutes here. Maybe we'll go from that to the latest from Mark Elias, writing at Democracy Docket. Again, probably not in the way much in the way of news here, but again, I'm going to repeat the message just to reinforce it with people. I think it's important to do that, even though I know you get it already. How the GOP will try to subvert our elections, from Mark Elias's view, and he's got a front row seat to all of it. He's, of course, the lawyer who's been involved in most of the cases defending the elections workers who have had their findings called into question by the bizarro fake audit group, and in the immediate aftermath of the 2020 elections, the 60-something lawsuits from the Trump camp about these things. Here's his view of it. We are 1, maybe 2 elections away from constitutional crisis. More than a year ago, before Election Day, Donald Trump made clear that he would not accept the results of a free and fair election if he didn't win. Too few people paid attention, discounting it as the ravings of a soon-to-be failed candidate. In the days following the November 2020 election, Trump and his allies executed a plan to subvert the election results. While they failed, Republicans learned from the experience and are prepared to try again. The future of our democracy rests on whether those committed to free and fair elections will prepare as well. And no indication yet that they are doing what's necessary to do it, but whatever. Anyway, immediately following the insurrection of January 6th, Republican state legislatures began laying the groundwork for 2022 and 24. They enacted new voter suppression laws optimized to disenfranchise black, brown, and young voters. They created false narratives of election irregularities and rallied their supporters around the big lie. Most recently, they began using their power in the redistricting process to ensure Republicans control the U.S. House over the next decade. All of which is true. Again, the point I want to underline here, and I feel like everybody else is giving short shrift to, is, again, people like Brad Raffensperger, it wasn't that they didn't want to cheat for Donald Trump. It was that they thought they couldn't do it because of legal restrictions, and that they would be called out, and that Trump would leave them hanging and twisting in the wind once the whole thing was found out. And it would be found out because it's really hard to hide just simply turning an election on its head. That's going to be investigated, and they'll be the ones found out in this. And there will be no help forthcoming from Donald Trump, who will, first of all, be out of power anyway. But even if he were back in power, no guarantee that he would actually help people who had helped him, even if he promised to pardon them along the way. But Brad Raffensperger wasn't that he didn't want to do it. It was that he thought that the law was on the wrong side to do what Trump wanted. Now, the legislature might, in fact, allow this and legalize what it was that Trump was asking for. Brad Raffensperger won't have such convictions any longer. I can be called out for it, but I'll survive legally, so everything will be fine. Although now he has to convince Republican primary voters that that's the case. And I guess I'm doing more to convince them of that than he is. Anyway, back to Mark Elias. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this stuff that the Republicans are doing, Democratic efforts in the states have been more limited. Where they control state power, Democrats have not expanded voting rights at the same pace as Republicans have restricted them. We've done a pretty good job here I think, in Virginia, but let's see. Not on every front, because we're called out in this paragraph. New York still has many restrictive voting laws, definitely true, including a ban on providing food and water to people waiting in line at the polls. Is that right? Do we have that ban in New York? We've all been screaming about that happening in Georgia, and nobody is talking about it being the case in New York. Virginia, which, we've done a lot and expanded the franchise, that's true, but we also still require an ID to vote in person and a witness signature to vote by mail. Colorado, which prides itself on its vote-by-mail law, rejected 29,000 mail-in ballots, 2/3 of which just happened to be from voters under the age of 35. At the federal level, Democrats have proposed two pieces of significant voting rights legislation, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Together they would rival the magnitude of the 1965 Civil Rights Act, yet neither has prospects for success as long as the Senate's filibuster rule applies. Facing this grim reality, some have begun to urge Congress to ignore voter suppression and focus exclusively on the potential for election subversion in 2024. Specifically, they obsess over the outdated and imprecise Electoral Count Act, the process by which states select and Congress certifies presidential electors. While no one questions that this act needs reform, the idea that we can fix democracy simply by revising this one law is simplistic and wrong. Of course, it only affects that one election, for one thing. It ignores the fact that election subversion begins with the rules used for voting and continues through state certification processes. It also ignores the reality that presidential elections are not the only ones being targeted for subversion. This misguided effort, I don't know if it's totally misguided, but certainly the exclusive focus might be. But okay, this misguided effort ignores the fact that voting rules that maximize participation result in fewer disputed outcomes, while complex and restrictive rules create a larger pool of disputed ballots that can be used to justify post-election challenges. Republicans learned from 2020 that the absence of virtually any fraud was a stumbling block to their efforts to overturn elections. Since they cannot force voters to commit fraud, they are redefining the terms. Several states, including Georgia, Iowa, Kansas, and Texas, have criminalized practices that were previously legal. Some of these laws target voters, whereas other provisions are aimed at election workers. The result is the same. The goal of these new provisions is to manufacture fraud where none exists. How so? Well, hopefully he'll explain a little bit. By manufacturing fraud, though, Republicans create controversy that can be exploited after Election Day by Republican candidates who do not prevail. The faux outrage created by the right-wing echo chamber vilifies election workers and provides excuses for disregarding election results. Republicans are so deeply invested in making key changes to the vote counting process, gave the wrong emphasis there, but they are also deeply invested in making these key changes to the vote counting process. In Georgia and Arkansas, the legislature has given Republican-controlled partisan election boards more power. In Arizona, the Republican legislature passed a new law transferring much of the power to enforce these rules from the Democratic Secretary of State to the Republican Attorney General. Republicans are also organizing and recruiting big lie advocates to run county elections and staff local election boards. Republicans know that the single point of greatest vulnerability for election subversion is the state certification of election results. And each of these changes, from making voting more difficult to ensuring that those who count votes are more partisan, provides an excuse for Republican election officials to refuse to certify election results. A certificate of election signed by the Secretary of State and the governor is the golden ticket to a seat in the House or Senate. Without a fully executed certificate of election, Senate rules and House precedent provide no simple way for a member of either chamber to be seated. A certificate of ascertainment signed by the governor determines which presidential candidates' electors meet as part of the Electoral College. If Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia or Doug Ducey in Arizona, had refused to sign their state's certificates of ascertainment, President Joe Biden would have faced a difficult path to have his electors in those states recognized. Had those two governors also refused to sign certificates of election for 3 senators and 11 Democratic members of Congress elected in 2020, Democrats would have likely been in the minority in both the House and Senate. You forget that the governors handle those too. It would be troubling enough if election certifications could be sabotaged by governors or secretaries of state. Republicans are already fielding candidates for those offices who would likely block the certification of free and fair election results that they do not support. But as Republicans demonstrated in 2020, they know how to target vulnerabilities in the system below that level. Consider what nearly happened last year in Michigan. The 2020 election results in Michigan were not especially close. President Biden won the state by 150,000 votes, while Gary Peters won re-election to the Senate by 90,000 votes. Given the margins and the fact that both the governor and the Secretary of State of Michigan are Democrats, Republicans knew that they would have no luck convincing the officials not to certify the presidential and senatorial election results. This forced Republicans to look further down the line in Michigan's certification process. In Michigan, official election results originate at the county level. In every county, a bipartisan canvassing board is responsible for collecting the results from the towns and precincts, double-checking them to make sure there are no obvious tabulating errors, and then sending those results on to the state for compilation. Under pressure from the Republican Party, the Republican members of the Wayne County Board of Canvassers, remember this, initially refused to certify the election results in the state's largest county for no legitimate reason. It was only after this became national news and pressure mounted that they reversed course and agreed to certify the county's results to the Michigan State Canvassing Board. Undeterred, Republicans launched an intense campaign to pressure the 2 Republican members of the statewide bipartisan board to refuse to certify the results. Again, the relentless pressure from the Republican Party had an impact. One of the 2 Republican members refused to certify the results by abstaining. Luckily, the other Republican did not. The results were certified and sent on to the governor and secretary of state, who then signed the certificate of ascertainment for president and certificate of election for the Democratic candidate for Senate. There are steps we can still take to protect our democracy that we must take to protect our democracy, but every day that passes brings us one day closer to a crisis. We cannot wait until 2024 to address this problem. Given the opportunity, Republicans will deploy these tactics to win control of the House and Senate in 2022. So, yeah, certainly don't wait for 24 in that case. And by the way, if you're listening to the show, you're probably quite clear on this, but if you're talking to somebody who says, well, that's not something that they would do, they wouldn't just ignore the obvious result, the numbers, the black and white numbers. Well, the previous story was about 1/2 of the Federal Election Commission ignoring the black and white reality of the law and refusing to go along with the idea of even imposing a civil fine against a guy who was basically appears to have been caught red-handed laundering money for China and Russia. Well, the Chinese money was fake. It turned out to be an undercover sting operation by a British newspaper, but he was under the impression that he was handling Chinese money. Somebody ought to maybe do something about this guy. But no, Republicans will actually just abandon their responsibility when they can help Republicans with it. So, what were those steps that we were going to say? Let's see if we can't finish up here. We must begin by honestly acknowledging the scope and complexity of the problem. Pundits and law professors cannot solve this in a soundbite or a law review article. There are no simple fixes or silver bullets. The fight against election subversion is ongoing and multifaceted. We must remain vigilant and proactive in detecting and combating these threats using every tool available, including legislation, public pressure, organizing, and litigation. Critically, we must also resist the advice to disconnect the fight for voting rights from the fight against election subversion. They are one and the same, I guess. Subverting an election is made easier by confusing and restrictive voting rules. When the process of voting has been criminalized, manufactured claims of fraud will give an easy excuse to those who seek to overturn the results. Anyone who suggests that congressional Democrats pare back the protection of voting rights to focus on election subversion neither understands the problem nor Republican motivation and strategy. Additionally, we need to recognize that extolling and protecting election officials' autonomy can be dangerous. We must reject efforts to conflate the interests of election administrators and the interests of voters. When enacting new laws and policies, we must focus on voters while being skeptical of elections officials' claims of inconvenience or secrecy. Some election workers will do the work of democracy, but others will try to subvert it. We cannot build a system that lionizes all election officials and fails to provide the tools to remove those who are undermining the will of the electorate. For its part, in addition to expanding and protecting voting rights, Congress must reform the state election certification process. There's a little bit more here, but I don't know if I can get it all the way through, but you're beginning to get the idea. If you have the time, you might want to spend some time reading the rest of his suggestions, or perhaps we can bring it up tomorrow. But for now, we're going to have to sign off and hand things off to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Maybe he'll touch on this, but I can tell you what he's got planned anyway.
From
next.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
This is some interest that we didn't get to today. A Senate report shines a light on the role of Republican Representative Scott Perry from Pennsylvania and the part he played in Trump's insurrection plot. Also, hey, guess what? Trump has a long and sordid history of mysterious fires at his properties. That might be something people want to find out about too. Weird. Stay tuned.